8. Natalie Bonnet. During the first stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, a 29-year-old Australian eyelash technician named Natalie Bonnet was stopped by police. She was making her way through a blockade in Wallen to get to work at the time, but that certainly didn't give her the go-ahead to bypass law enforcement. An officer told Bonnet that it was against the law to have her phone hooked to a car charger while attached to her windshield. He asked for her name and ID, but instead of handing it over, she asked to speak with a different officer instead, since the first one was making her feel deeply uncomfortable. Moments later, that same officer pulled Bonnet out of the vehicle while a passenger tried yanking her back inside. Bonnet later told 9 News that she didn't refuse to show her license, but that she simply refused to show it to that particular cop. She also said that she didn't feel safe getting out of the car, and that she didn't understand why the officer was even stopping her. If she knew that the cop was going to force her out of her vehicle, causing her clothes to rip and leaving her with scratches and bruises, Bonnet said she would have just followed orders. The woman denied allegations from social media commenters that she was a COVID conspiracy theorist and said that she actually suffers from anxiety. She learned the hard way that day that the rules apply to everyone. 7. Matthew Nicholson. It's not unusual for a grown man to throw a temper tantrum over a video game, but a 28-year-old California man named Matthew Nicholson took his anger way too far in 2018 after his gaming headset broke. A few days into the new year, officers responded to calls about a shooting at Matthew's home outside Modesto, where they found 68-year-old Lydia Nicholson clinging to life after being shot in the head. She passed away a short while later at a local hospital. According to investigators, Lydia heard Matthew yelling in his room and went to check on him. They argued, and at some point, Matthew lost his temper and broke his headset, which he immediately blamed his mother for. He threatened to kill his parents, then grabbed a handgun and shot Lydia in the head. A family friend told Fox 40 that Matthew also tried to shoot his 81-year-old father, Loren, but the weapon jammed. Loren wrestled the firearm away from his son and called 911 while the suspect fled to a relative's house. He was arrested later during a traffic stop. Matthew pleaded guilty to murder and assault with a firearm and was sentenced to 27 years in prison for the unnecessary attack. 6. Casey Garcia. 31-year-old Casey Garcia believes security at her daughter's middle school in El Paso County, Texas needed to be improved. So, she disguised herself as her child one day in 2021 and spent almost the entire day going to her daughter's classes before someone finally realized what was happening. She later said in a YouTube video that staff members seemed too preoccupied with monitoring students' phone use than confirming her identity. Given Garcia's petite 4'11", 105-pound frame, it's not surprising that she was mistaken for a child by most of the school's employees. But she found it concerning that it took so long for someone to take a close enough look to identify her. At one point, she even said she was the only person in the classroom, and the teacher still didn't realize she wasn't her daughter. In her video, the concerned mum apologized to the school district and its staff, stating that she thinks they're wonderful people and is sorry it had to be them. Garcia's message and other social media posts were meant to raise awareness, but they triggered a police investigation instead. Authorities charged her with criminal trespassing and tampering with government records. While the outcome of the case is unclear, it's probably safe to say that she went about her activism the wrong way and inadvertently focused the spotlight on herself instead of the school's shortcomings. 5. Leson Duffy. The exact nature of the relationship between 28-year-old Leson Duffy and 40-year-old Sergio Ramirez is unknown. But things went sour between the two in 2022 when Duffy got angry with Ramirez for sleeping around. He also suspected her of destroying some of his belongings, including comic books and a video game console. Instead of taking a rational approach and moving on with his life, Duffy seemed hell-bent on getting revenge. During the morning one day, he allegedly confronted Ramirez in front of her apartment in Brooklyn's Cypress Hills neighborhood and robbed her friend who was standing with her. According to prosecutors, Duffy then went out and bought twine, lighter fluid, and a lighter. Authorities believe he then returned and beat Ramirez up, tied her to a chair, dumped lighter fluid on her, and lit her on fire before leaving her to burn alive in the apartment. A witness reportedly saw the assault happen but failed to intervene. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ramirez was dead. Police finally tracked down and arrested Duffy over 2 months after the homicide. He was charged with first and second-degree murder as well as robbery. The case is still ongoing. 4. Kevin Love. Some basketball fans describe Kevin Love as a standout NBA player, while others are less impressed. Still, most agree that he's good at the sport and a valuable team member. Another thing people seem united on is their disgust at his immature and diva-like behavior during a few games in the 2019-2020 season. At the time, Love was a forward for the Cleveland Cavaliers and was caught in an ongoing feud with the team's coach, John Beilein, who was later replaced. On New Year's Eve 2019, Love lost his temper during a game against the Toronto Raptors and received a fine. Then, during a losing game against the Oklahoma City Thunders days later, he threw up his hands in disgust multiple times at his teammates, angrily firing a hard pass and turning his back on the defense. He also got into an argument with the team's manager, Kobe Altman, since he was mad about being fined for the Toronto game. Love initially accused the media of exaggerating the alleged heated nature of this conversation, which came during long-running rumors that he was going to be traded from the team. But he eventually realized his behavior was unacceptable and publicly apologized in a tweet, admitting that he was acting childish. He put the cringe-worthy series of bratty displays behind him and continued playing for the Cavaliers until early 2023, when he instead signed with the Miami Heat. 3. James Pack. In 2012, single mum Susan Johnson found what seemed like the perfect apartment for her and her 2 children after a difficult search. Located in Biddeford, Maine, it was attached to the home of her new landlord James Pack and his wife. They were an older couple who seemed easygoing and respectable. But it wasn't long before Pack began nitpicking Susan. He complained about where her son Derek Thompson parked his vehicle. When the boy's girlfriend, Olivia, spent the night, Pack accused the family of violating their rental agreement, which supposedly prohibited them from having people move in without permission. The fact that he paid close enough attention to notice the young woman made the family feel like their privacy was being violated, and as time went on, the landlord's complaints became more frequent and obsessive. He was also short-tempered, which seemed childish at first, but became increasingly threatening as his hatred of the tenants escalated. One day, Pack allegedly barged into the apartment and threatened Derek because he disapproved of the way the teen shoveled snow. Pack's wife, Amit, realized that her husband's behavior was irrational. She even apologized to Susan and her kids several times. But she was powerless to stop Pack from continuing his angry campaign. Susan and her kids soon realized that the only way to make the torment stop was to move. They couldn't find a new place to live overnight though, but they began searching. In the meantime, Pack decided he had to evict the family. One day, after a more explosive confrontation with her landlord, Susan called the police. She showed responding officers recordings of Pack's threats and harassment, but they told her to work things out in civil court. As they left, Pack yelled that he had nothing to lose, that they would see him in the newspaper soon, and that it's going to be a bloody mess. Despite being within earshot, the police simply left the scene. Just moments later, Pack entered Susan's apartment with a gun and started shooting. Susan was shot but survived, and her younger son hid in a back room. Derek and Olivia were unfortunately shot dead. Pack was charged with first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity but was found competent. To avoid making his family suffer through lengthy court proceedings, he pleaded guilty to all charges in early 2016 and got 2 life sentences. Even after admitting to his crimes, he never showed remorse, so he went to prison stubbornly believing that he was the true victim. 2. The tantrum at Stanford. In early 2023, students at Stanford Law, the second most prestigious law school in the US, invited US Circuit Court Judge Kyle Duncan to give a lecture called COVID, Guns, and Twitter. Duncan agreed to the discussion, which was meant to focus on how the decisions of his court have affected the higher Supreme Court. Of course, not everyone at the school agrees with the judge's decisions or the values they reflect. After all, it's impossible to agree with everyone, especially when it comes to politics and government. But instead of sitting through the lecture, the students who disliked Duncan complained to Tyrion Steinbach, the school's Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. In an email to the Stanford community, Steinbach wrote that Duncan repeatedly and proudly threatened healthcare and basic rights for marginalized communities, including LGBTQ+ people, Native Americans, immigrants, prisoners, black voters, and women. If that's true, it's understandable why some people didn't like him and didn't want him to speak at the university. But many people deny that Duncan supports prejudice policies, and while Steinbach clearly isn't a fan of the judge, she didn't take action to cancel his speaking engagement. She also said that she wasn't going to get in the way of students' right to protest and resolved to take a hands-off approach. Duncan tried in vain to give his speech, but was repeatedly drowned out by insults from protesters. There were 5 administrators present during the chaotic assembly, but none of them tried quieting the angry students down. When the judge asked officials to get the crowd under control, Steinbach spent several minutes delivering lamenting remarks from her portfolio, which included allegations that his presence was tearing at the fabric of the community, hurting students and denying them of their rights. After trying and failing to get a word in for nearly 30 minutes, Duncan gave up. He later described the engagement as a therapy session from hell and said it felt like a setup. Like with all things political in the US, the incident deepened the divide between groups that hold opposing beliefs. Many people felt like Duncan got what he deserved, while others believe that his inability to deliver his thoughts represents a troubling restriction of free speech. The people who are angry at how the event turned out don't even necessarily share the same views as the judge, but they support his right to express himself freely, and they're equally troubled by the protesters' actions. The incident poses bigger questions on where to draw the line between rightfully shunning hateful speech and unfairly silencing someone because they might say something offensive but isn't necessarily illegal or explicitly prejudiced. 1. Amy Harrington. In 2022, 38-year-old Amy Harrington allegedly drove drunk one night and was almost home when she rear-ended another car in Madeira Beach, Florida. Responding deputies noticed that her eyes were glassy and red and that her pupils were very dilated, leading them to suspect that she was under the influence. According to an arrest report, Harrington struggled to follow simple instructions during a field sobriety test and was unsteady on her feet and almost falling when attempting to walk in a straight line. In body cam footage of the conversation, a deputy was heard asking Harrington to walk the line and then saying, "Do you want to pay attention so I can give you the instructions?" Harrington replied with a sarcastic tone, telling the deputy that he sounded like her dance coach. She proceeded to take 5 steps down the line and transitioned seamlessly into a drunken ballet sequence. Unamused, the deputy said, "That wasn't the exercise that I was demonstrating." His remark did little to stop Harrington from busting a move, as she changed up her style to what local news station WFLA described as a ballet/Irish folk hybrid dance. She later refused testing, similarly to how she behaved during a traffic stop in 2019, and she was charged with driving under the influence, with both property damage and refusal to submit to testing. 10. Samuel Parsons Salas. Maria Vera was celebrating her 25th birthday with family and friends at a Chicago nightclub in December 2022 when a confrontation broke out between several people. Someone hit Mariah during the disagreement, and one of the guests, 32-year-old Samuel Parsons Salas, was kicked out of the club. Instead of ending the drama right then and there, the group took the argument outside. Mariah's father, Ricky Vera, approached Samuel, demanding to know who hit his daughter. Things became more heated as the men exchanged words. Samuel's girlfriend stood between them and tried to de-escalate the argument, but it was her own boyfriend who refused to listen to reason. In what can only be described as a senseless tragedy, Samuel allegedly pulled a gun and shot Ricky Vera in the head and chest. The onslaught continued from there. 26-year-old Mario Pozuelos, a family friend, was shot multiple times and fell to the curb. The shooter then approached Mariah, who was kneeling over her father's body, and shot her in the head. As Pozuelos lay dying, the gunman walked back over to him and fired 2 more bullets into his skull. Before getting into a car and fleeing the scene, the suspect shot Mariah's 24-year-old niece, Mercedes Tavares, who was hiding behind a van. He then walked up to the young woman and shot her again. Ricky Vera, Mario Pozuelos, and Mercedes Tavares died from their injuries. Mariah, on the other hand, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, where she fought for her life, according to the most recent update from just a few days after the shooting. In a statement, Cook County prosecutor Ann McCord Rogers said that Samuel, a convicted felon with a violent history, who was on parole at the time of the massacre, destroyed his girlfriend's phone and forced her to drive him to his home at gunpoint. She attempted to escape by crashing the vehicle, but it didn't work, and he held her hostage at his apartment until the police came after him. They captured Samuel after a brief foot chase and booked him on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of kidnapping. Samuel allegedly admitted to the crimes during questioning and is being held without bail. His next court date is in July of 2023. 9. Malik Fischer and Damonte Cherry. 23-year-old Damonte Cherry went live on Instagram one day in August of 2022 to talk about friends of his who lost their lives to violence in Central Florida. During the broadcast, a 19-year-old viewer named Malik Fischer allegedly threatened Cherry and trash-talked his deceased pals. Cherry was fatally gunned down a week later outside his home in Zellwood. According to the Orange County Sheriff's Office, Malik and 2 others waited on the street in a parked vehicle until they saw Cherry driving by. When the victim saw the trio, he reportedly tried to make a U-turn and flee, but he was unable to get away before Fischer allegedly ran up to the car and shot him. Cherry fired back in self-defense, striking Malik in the leg. Malik's sister, 21-year-old Genesis Shemaiah Fischer, was subsequently shot in the face. The siblings fled the scene on foot and were picked up by a third party who drove them to the hospital. At some point, Malik dialed 911 and could be heard saying he was shot in the head. The dispatcher initially thought he was talking about his own injuries, but police later concluded that by that point in the call, he thought he'd hung up and was talking to a witness at the scene about Cherry. Genesis and Malik both survived their injuries and were charged with first-degree murder and armed robbery. According to investigators, Malik Fischer went on Instagram shortly after the shooting and posted footage of the bullet wound to his leg. In the video, he said that somebody was gonna die. Detectives believe this was a threat directed at Cherry before Malik realized he was dead. Unfortunately, the alleged actions resulting from his anger could land him on death row or behind bars for the rest of his life. 8. Adam Mann and Lisa Beverly. Like many people who experience baby mama or daddy drama, 30-year-old Lisa Beverly began voicing her frustrations on Facebook in 2009 when her ex, 29-year-old Adam Mann, failed to pay child support. However, she wasn't just harmlessly venting in her posts. She was taunting Mann with threats to report him to British Child Support Authority. Beverly made good on the threat, and the agency sent Mann a letter demanding £400 in back support and continued weekly payments of £17. Even after this small victory, Beverly continued to harass her former partner on social media. Shortly after the letter was delivered, she made a Facebook post stating, "Now who's laughing?" and "Your son hates you and so do I." She also ruthlessly smeared Mann in private conversations with her friends. It's unclear what exactly set Mann off, whether it was Beverly's vicious smack-talking, her decision to report him to child support authorities, or perhaps both. But instead of ignoring his ex and just catching up with the payments he owed, he claimed he couldn't afford the back pay. He also refused to take a DNA test to determine whether the child was actually his. In the meantime, he became consumed with rage and decided to solve his problems in the worst possible way. The antagonistic war between the former lovers ended when Beverly was found murdered in a pool of blood at her flat in London. Someone had bludgeoned her with a hammer and stabbed her to death in what was clearly a crime of passion, and authorities immediately looked to Mann as their top suspect. His new partner told detectives that he was at home when Beverly was killed, but cell phone data proved otherwise. Investigators also uncovered a computer with recently deleted files on it that had been taken from Beverly's apartment, along with other compelling evidence pointing directly at Mann as the killer. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial, but an unconvinced jury found him guilty of murder. The judge imposed a 24-year prison sentence and condemned Mann's blatant lack of remorse over the deadly measures he took to avoid his responsibilities as a father. 7. Sher Shriner. One night in 2017, a 42-year-old US Army veteran named Barbara Rogers dialed 911 and told the dispatcher that she had obeyed her boyfriend's instructions to hold a gun to his forehead and pull the trigger. Police arrived at the couple's apartment in Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains to find 32-year-old Stephen Mineo dead on the floor from a gunshot wound, just as Rogers had described in the 911 call. The situation only got more bizarre from there. During questioning, Rogers explained that she and Mineo were devout members of an alien reptile cult led by a conspiracy theorist named Sher Shriner. Most people, including the detectives who investigated the case, had never heard of the woman. But she had more than 20,000 followers who were captivated by her radio show and YouTube ramblings about how politicians, celebrities, and other powerful people are shape-shifting lizards under the command of alien overlords. Shriner and her followers believed that they were plotting to take over the planet and implement an authoritarian worldwide government. Shriner described herself as a messenger of the highest God, and while it sounds laughable to the average person, she had an uncanny knack for brainwashing people who were seeking a sense of spiritual purpose. She convinced some of her followers to abandon their lives and dedicate themselves wholly to her mission. Shortly before Steve Mineo's death, Shriner tried to convince him that Rogers was a vampire witch reptilian super soldier disguised as a human. Mineo realized Shriner was a fraud and called her out in a series of YouTube videos, only to face vicious backlash from the cult. Just when it seemed like the couple was ready to move forward with their lives, a night of drinking somehow led to tragedy. Rogers was charged with first-degree murder, but a jury convicted her of the lesser charge of third-degree murder. She was sentenced to 15 to 40 years in prison as a result. Shriner reportedly used Mineo's death to bolster her own agenda, selling the tragedy to her followers as a power play by corrupt people and organizations. She also used the ordeal as a great reason to donate to her campaign to save the world from evil. However, Shriner passed away several months later from natural causes. 6. Charlie Sheen. American actor Charlie Sheen has appeared in many popular films and shows and become a household name for his part in the Emmy Award-winning series 2.5 Men. But he's arguably best known for his infinitely more fascinating personal life, which includes 3 drama-filled marriages, a life-threatening battle against addiction, and a highly public fall from grace marked by domestic violence allegations, drug-fueled rampages, disturbing Twitter rants, and other reckless and destructive behavior. During the early 2000s, amid multiple arrests and failed rehab stints, Sheen became entangled in an acrimonious divorce and child custody battle with his ex-wife, Denise Richards. In one particularly noteworthy incident that happened in 2008, Richards released a voicemail she'd received from Sheen 3 years earlier, in 2005. The message consisted of an expletive-laden rant calling her various derogatory names, including the widely despised racial slur known as the N-word. Shortly before the leak, Richards had mentioned in a TV Guide interview that she no longer planned to take the high road when it came to her dealings with Sheen, who'd only become increasingly hostile and bitter during the former couple's seemingly endless war over their 2 daughters. The voicemail leak proved that she was ready to play hardball, and it served its purpose well by further damaging Sheen's already struggling reputation. The actor apologized to the public shortly after the voicemail was released. When it comes to the use of certain words, sorry doesn't always cut it, and this situation certainly qualified as one of those instances that the public usually struggles to forgive. But his derogatory diatribe would soon be overshadowed by his continued outrageous behavior. One of Sheen's most career-damaging moves came in 2011 when he bashed 2.5 Men creator Chuck Lorre during an interview with radio host Alex Jones. In what can only be described as a typical bizarre Charlie Sheen rant, he said he embarrassed Lorre in front of his kids and described him as having an unevolved mind. By then, producers at CBS and Warner Brothers were already highly concerned about Sheen's behavior, which they'd mostly overlooked due to his acting talent and the show's popularity. But everyone has a limit, and Sheen lost his contract with the series, going from the highest paid actor on television to jobless and disgraced overnight. He appears to have gotten his life together and has approached his past with a level of honesty and remorse that's helped to mend his public image. But his years-long meltdown is still the first thing that comes to many people's minds when they hear his name, and unfortunately for him, that will likely never change. 5. Tori Emory and Danielle Booth. In the age of the internet, many rivalries begin on social media, where people seem to be a lot braver than they would be in a face-to-face confrontation. But sometimes, these battles get so heated that they spill over into the real world and end in horrifying violence. Such was the case for 23-year-old Tori Emory and 20-year-old Danielle Booth, who began a war of words online in 2010 when they found themselves competing for the affections of an inmate doing time at a Michigan State Correctional Facility. As the Facebook feud escalated, Booth began to fear for her safety and filed a police report. Just days later, Emory spotted Booth in the passenger seat of another young woman's car in the city of Pontiac. Emory chased the vehicle, ramming into it repeatedly as the driver, 21-year-old Alicia Abernathy, desperately tried to escape, with both cars reaching speeds of over 80 miles per hour. The pursuit ended in tragedy when Abernathy ran a red light and crashed into a dump truck. She died from her injuries, and Booth was rushed to hospital in critical condition. Emory, whose young child was in the car during the reckless encounter, fled the scene. But law enforcement quickly caught up with her and arrested her for murder, assault, and child abuse. During Emory's arraignment, her mother Tracy stood outside the courthouse, offering a different version of events than the one prosecutors presented in court. She claimed that the victims, Booth and Abernathy, saw Emory at a fast food restaurant that day, and that the young woman harassed her daughter and challenged her to chase them. Tracy said that Emory didn't mean to kill anyone, but that she was merely looking for a fight. These claims did little to help Emory's case. She ultimately pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and received an 18 to 60-year prison sentence. At her sentencing hearing, she apologized to Abernathy's family and expressed remorse for her actions. 4. Franklin Williams. When Franklin Williams wouldn't stay quiet during a sentencing hearing in Cleveland for a series of armed robberies and other crimes in 2018, Judge John Russo ordered court deputies to tape his mouth shut. Russo proceeded to sentence Williams to 24 years in prison. However, the judge was apparently put off by his own actions, so much so that he called a special hearing a week later to apologize for having Williams' mouth taped closed. During the proceeding, he pointed out that there is legal precedent for gagging a defendant to keep order in a court, but he said he was nevertheless sorry for doing so, even though Williams interrupted the proceeding more than 60 times in less than an hour. Before the apology hearing, Williams told the Fox 8i team that he was just trying to raise awarenesses to injustices by speaking out in court, although he only said freedom of speech, no duct tape repeatedly before his mouth was covered. He said that the ordeal left him feeling humiliated, and the NAACP described Judge Russo's actions as outrageous and a failure of basic human decency. The case got even more complicated when Williams told the I-Team that he'd been hit in the head and didn't even remember going to trial. He also claimed that he didn't receive any medical treatment for his injury. During his apology, Russo said that even though he imposed a 24-year sentence, he never made it official. Instead, he recused himself from the case and deferred to the state's Supreme Court to appoint another judge to make the final say on the matter. Things didn't go any better the second time around, however. The case was reassigned to Judge Patricia Cosgrove, who called Williams a narcissist and handed down an even heavier 33-year prison sentence. She said that the defendant didn't learn from his 4 previous prison stints and that his crimes only escalated over the decade leading up to his most recent conviction. 3. Jamek Blake and Kwame Dancy. Jamek Blake and Kwame Dancy grew up in Harlem together and were best friends from the age of 12 all the way into adulthood. But their bond was tested and ultimately destroyed when the pair got into a Twitter beef in 2009. The rivalry between the 22-year-olds started out with rude but seemingly harmless smack-talking back and forth. But they became increasingly angry at each other, especially as other social media users upped the ante by taking sides and joining in on the issue. Tensions eventually reached a boiling point, and Blake fatally shot Dancy on the street, bringing the feud between besties turned enemies to a tragic and shocking end. Just hours earlier, Blake had posted a tweet directed at Dancy, saying that people were looking for him. In the same post, he wrote, "Don't think I won't give up your address for a price, better chill ASAP." A month earlier, the accused killer had ominously tweeted RIP Kwame. Shortly after the shooting, Blake showed up at the hospital and consoled Dancy's grief-stricken father. Prosecutors claimed that this was an attempt at a cover-up and that there was hostility between Blake and Dancy even before the Twitter feud started, when the pair publicly fought over a woman. Blake's arrest came as a shock to Dancy's mother, Madeline Smith, who thought the friendship between her son and his killer, who she treated like a second son, was strong enough to overcome their differences. She was also stunned by how a Twitter quarrel culminated into such deadly violence. Sadly, it was among the first of many fatal social media battles that have occurred throughout the world in the nearly 15 years since the shooting. Blake pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received a 21-year prison term as a result. At his sentencing, he admitted that his ego clouded his judgment and, in his words, would not allow me to back down. 2. Nathan A. White. Attorney Nathan A. White was working on a federal case as a partner with the prestigious Taylor English law firm in 2023 when he lost his cool during a courtroom exchange with opposing counsel L. Michelle Gessner. It was apparently bad enough for Gessner to file a motion seeking sanctions against White for his behavior. According to documents obtained by the American Bar Association Journal, White spoke to Gessner suddenly and without warning or provocation, very loudly and in a condescending tone. He allegedly exploded at Gessner for simply answering a question he asked, calling her an effing piece of you-know-what and a worthless human. Gessner said in her complaint that she told White he doesn't get to speak to her like that, and that he shouldn't speak to her at all if he can't be respectful. She gathered her belongings and asked a court worker if the exchange was captured on a video or audio recording, at which point White allegedly pointed his finger in her face close enough to strike her and said that he didn't care if he was recorded. According to the motion, White went on to call Gessner a worthless piece of you-know-what once again. Federal Judge Maxo Cockburn Jr. concluded that White did in fact use vulgar language against Gessner and that he approached her in an antagonistic manner. Cockburn described White's behavior as deplorable and unacceptable, and he said that his actions couldn't be justified under any circumstances. White reportedly claimed that he'd recently been hospitalized when the incident happened and that he was stressed out due to his medical issues. And while this explanation failed to spare him from Judge Cockburn's admonishing remarks, he managed to avoid sanctions as long as it didn't happen again. 1. Robert Fries. In 2018, a man from Exeter, New Hampshire named Robert Fries was arrested for writing a comment on a news website accusing Police Chief William Shoup of covering up the actions of a corrupt officer. The article was about a retiring officer who Fries clearly had issues with. In addition to the allegation against Chief Shoup, Fries described the officer as a dirty cop and accused him of misconduct. According to the state's defamation law, it's a crime to intentionally and falsely disparage another person. Consequently, Fries was slapped with a misdemeanor charge for his statement a few weeks after his comment appeared online. The criminal complaint stated that Fries purposely made a false statement that he had reason to believe would expose the target to public contempt, but not everyone agreed with that assessment. In fact, Fries' arrest called the attention of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, which described the seemingly outdated law as a policy that criminalizes saying mean things about people. The organization even filed a federal lawsuit arguing that the defamation law violates a person's First Amendment rights. Shortly after the ACLU spoke out, the charge against Fries was dismissed. But he didn't win all of his battles against the New Hampshire legal system. After the case was dismissed, Fries sued the state's attorney general, claiming that the defamation statute is unconstitutional. His bid to overturn it ultimately lost though, and the law remains on the books today.
Number 10. Marlon and LaShonda Moore. Texas couple Marlon and LaShonda Moore rose to influencer status in the years leading up to the COVID-19 pandemic, depicting themselves as role models who'd achieved success purely through hard work. When the pandemic shut the world down in 2020, it complicated their ability to make money, which depended largely on socializing and networking at in-person events. In August of that year, the Moores parlayed their internet fame into a new money-making opportunity, Blessings in No Time, or BINT, an investment program that they promoted as safe, legal, and lucrative. In what the couple marketed as a pathway to prosperity for the black community, they promised an 800% return for each $1,400 investment. They also offered the ability for unsatisfied clients to back out at any time and get a full refund. During a period when countless Americans were struggling to make ends meet, it seemed like a no-brainer to take advantage of the offer. Many of BINT's early members received their promised returns, which convinced their family and friends to get in on the action, but it wasn't long before some investors failed to see their payouts. In the meantime, BINT's promotion system, which was based on recruiting new members, became increasingly complicated and difficult to understand. This was no mistake, according to investigators who alleged that BINT was an illegal pyramid scheme. While more and more people demanded refunds, the Moores continued showing off their most recent purchases and excursions on social media. To many, it wasn't hard to see where their money was going, and they took it as a red flag to cash out immediately. At first, the couple urged frustrated investors to be patient and to recruit more members in order to receive their promised funds. But like any pyramid scheme, the operation crumbled under its own weight, and the Moores eventually admitted that they couldn't afford to pay everyone. They still urged people to stay on board, wait longer, and recruit new members, but at some point, the gig was up. Many people never received their payouts, and in some cases were left in financial peril, with other investors losing as much as $62,000 of their hard-earned money. The Moores' assets were frozen in 2021, and they're currently facing lawsuits from the Federal Trade Commission and the state of Texas. They're accused of bilking BINT members out of millions of dollars and claiming in court that they're now destitute. Sadly, many clients may never get their money back, even with a court victory. At the very least, chasing after it will most likely be a years-long uphill battle. Number 9. Tom Gerardi. Tom Gerardi made a name for himself as a big-shot attorney back in 1970 when he became the first lawyer in California to win a more than $1 million judgment in a medical malpractice case. He went on to represent clients in numerous major cases, including a lawsuit against Pacific Gas and Electric that won a $460 million settlement for water contamination victims and inspired the movie Erin Brockovich. Gerardi's fame and fortune grew with each prolific courtroom victory, and at some point his success seems to have gone to his head. He shamelessly flaunted his wealth in the form of lavish vacations, exotic cars, private jets, and expensive jewelry and gifts for the women in his life, and used it to socialize with powerful politicians. By 2020, Gerardi's spending had become out of control, and many of the clients he'd represented over the last decade began to complain about not receiving the settlements they'd won in court. They became sickened and angry as they watched Gerardi and his much younger wife, Erica, show off their exorbitant lifestyle on the reality series The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Until then, the obnoxious attorney had avoided disciplinary measures from past allegations of wrongdoing. This time around, authorities investigated. They found evidence that Gerardi had misused settlement funds that were supposed to go to his clients, including $3 million that was meant for surviving widows and orphans of plane crash victims. Some people never saw a single penny of their award or agreed to settle out for a mere portion of what they were expecting because they really needed the money and it was better than nothing. Meanwhile, Gerardi funneled the money to his personal accounts and used it to maintain his wanton spending habits and to pay bills and expenses for his law firm. He was disbarred in 2022 and was subsequently indicted by federal grand juries in California and Illinois on a laundry list of fraud charges for allegedly swindling $18 million from his victims. The 83-year-old now claims to be broke after squandering an 8-figure sum of money that wasn't even his to begin with. If convicted, Gerardi could face decades in prison, which would effectively amount to the rest of his life. But the future of the case remains uncertain due to Gerardi's Alzheimer's diagnosis, which poses questions about his competency to stand trial. For now, he's living in a memory care facility while his brother acts as his court-appointed conservator over what little money he has left. Number 8. John Fox. It was impossible not to notice when John Fox was driving around Berkeley, California, in one of the luxury cars from his ever-growing collection, which included a Maserati, several Corvettes, Ferraris, and more. He bought the vehicles with the multi-million-dollar fortune he made as the owner of a fine wine store and warehouse called Premier Cru. Fox opened his first store in 1980. A large portion of his business revenue came from pre-arrival customers who paid for their order weeks, months, or even years ahead of time in exchange for what seemed like unbeatable prices. At some point, Fox began selling phantom wine, a product that he had no plans to actually order. He kept what he was doing a secret from his employees and created fake invoices to make it appear as though his purchases matched up with what customers thought they were buying from the company. Every year, Fox increased the amount of phantom wine he sold, while also continuing to do honest business. By the time Fox fell under investigation in 2015, the scam had been running for at least 5 years, and he'd scammed customers out of somewhere between $20 and $45 million. He'd helped himself to a generous portion of the money, which he blew on his cars, homes, golf club memberships, and dates with women he met online. Fox also used a lot of the money coming in from new customers to satisfy past orders. Around the same time, his personal life began to fall apart. 2 years earlier, Fox's conspicuous displays of wealth had landed him a date with a serial extortionist named Saul Ki-yum, who demanded $240,000 and threatened to tell his wife they slept together if he didn't pay up. And so he paid her $10,000 per month in order to stay quiet. Federal authorities arrested Fox for running a suspected Ponzi scheme. Premier Crew went bankrupt, and most of the furnishings and inventory, some of which Fox had paid shockingly high prices for, sold for pennies on the dollar at auction. As part of a plea deal, he helped the FBI catch Saul Ki-yum, who'd victimized other rich men, and he admitted to a single count of wire fraud. He served 4.5 years in prison and was released in 2016, but he's not off the hook for his crimes. Fox agreed to pay $45 million in restitution to 9,000 former customers. He's now in his 70s, but it likely won't earn him much sympathy or spare him from getting shaken down by the feds at the slightest hint of him running into money. Number 7. Elanora Incardona. Milan-based Italian Instagram influencer Elanora Incardona documents essentially every aspect of her life on social media, making it easy for complete strangers to know where she's at almost any given time. With nearly 500,000 followers, she makes her living entirely from her internet presence. But the ease of tracing the 31-year-old's steps and her daily displays of the finer things in life made her an easy target for a group of thieves one day in early 2021. The suspects dressed inconspicuously for Milan's high fashion scene and waited for Incardona to leave her apartment. They watched as she stepped outside with her dog, stopped to make a video letting her fans know what she was up to, and continued on her way to a Tiffany's jewelry store, where she uploaded more social media content. While she was gone, the burglars entered her apartment and emptied it of valuables, including Incardona's clothing, bags, and shoes. She would later learn that she was targeted by an organized group of criminals who handpicked their victims by searching for social media users who appeared to be wealthy in their photos. By then, police were already onto the suspects, who'd also recently targeted a TV host named Diletta Leotta and other well-to-do Milanese residents. Law enforcement arrested the men outside Incardona's home. Authorities said the young thieves are both skilled and difficult to identify as criminals. They're young, fit, attractive, and fashionable, and are also apparently really good at climbing walls with what police described as circus-like skill. Prosecutor Francesca Krupi, who calls the suspects their acrobat thieves, cited the case as an example of why people should be careful not to overshare online. While this was the first case in the region of a group of burglars to habitually use social media to select their victims, it likely won't be the last time something like this happens, especially now that the sophisticated group's methods have been described in news articles all over the world. In the end, the moral of the story is, flaunt your wealth at your own risk. Number 6. Tony Harris. In 2015, 50-year-old electronics repairman Tony Harris snapped a photo of his fiancée, 27-year-old Amber Crane, holding multiple stacks of $20 bills. He posted it on Facebook along with a humorous caption stating, "I misplaced $60,000. I hope my wife didn't go shopping with it." A week later, 3 armed intruders entered the couple's home in Philadelphia's Kings Essing neighborhood and demanded the money. Crane insisted the family didn't have any cash, but the suspects didn't seem to believe her. They then forced Harris and Crane into separate rooms at gunpoint, while repeatedly ordering them to hand over the cash. The burglar holding Crane hostage overheard Harris fighting back against the other 2 suspects and went into the other room to investigate. He shot Harris in the head at point-blank range as 2 of the victims' 3 children looked on, and afterwards the perpetrators fled the scene. Harris died from his injuries at a nearby hospital. Crane survived, and thankfully the children weren't harmed either. The recent Facebook post of Crane posing with fat wads of cash naturally led to the suspicion that the killers saw the photo and targeted the household, thinking they would make off like fat cats. But they didn't seem to get away with much because the family apparently wasn't nearly as well off as the Post made them seem. After the murder, Crane and the kids left the house and went to stay elsewhere. Just days later, someone smashed the padlock securing the front door and ransacked the home, making off with video game consoles, TVs, laptops, and some new children's clothing. Unfortunately, Harris's murder and the subsequent burglary remain unsolved to this day. Number 5. Christopher Robinson. 23-year-old Christopher Robinson was behind on his child support payments in 2013 when he posted photos of himself with large amounts of cash and expensive bottles of liquor on Facebook. In fact, the Milwaukee resident had never made a single $150 monthly payment since the child's birth more than 2 years earlier, according to police. The photos gave law enforcement enough evidence to apply for a search warrant, and Facebook was court-ordered to give investigators full access to Robinson's account. Based on the evidence they found, the alleged deadbeat dad was charged with 3 felony counts relating to his failure to pay support. Milwaukee County Chief Deputy District Attorney Kent Lovin told ABC News that he couldn't discuss specifics about the case, but he described Facebook as a useful tool for identifying someone who's been misleading about their lifestyle. In Robinson's case, he definitely had the means to make his child support payments, but was refusing not to. The photos didn't prove that it was his money, but they enabled detectives to dig deeper with their investigation. Robinson reportedly failed to appear in court after being served with a warrant, and it's unclear what became of the case. Number 4. Richard Catalano. Just hours after 26-year-old Richard Catalano posted a photo of large piles of cash on Facebook in 2014, an armed intruder pried open the back door of his home in North Providence, Rhode Island, and confronted him in his bedroom. The burglar, later identified as 24-year-old Dari Garcia, demanded money and then fatally shot Catalano, while the victim's girlfriend hid behind the couple's bed with their puppies. Upon hearing the gunshot, Catalano's mother, Lori, rushed into his room and came face to face with Garcia, who shot her in the shoulder. Catalano's stepfather, Christopher Tabalillo, tried to tackle the suspect but was repeatedly pistol whipped in the head. Lori tried to intervene, but Garcia bit off the tip of her finger and shot her in the face. She ran to a neighbor's house for help while Garcia attempted to flee as well, only to get outside and realize that his getaway driver had already sped off. So he went back inside and shot himself in the face. Both he and Lori were rushed to the hospital when emergency responders arrived, and surprisingly, they survived. Garcia had a lengthy criminal record that included past convictions for violent crimes. Earlier that year, a police officer shot him after he attacked his mother. His violent tendencies, coupled with Catalano's Facebook posts showing off what appeared to be thousands of dollars, were apparently a perfect recipe for disaster, although it's unclear whether the photo inspired the deadly intrusion. Speaking with local station WJAR shortly after the murder, Catalano's father, Richard Lopez, questioned why Garcia wasn't already locked up for his past crimes, which would have perhaps saved his son's life. Garcia was convicted on over a dozen counts, including murder, burglary, assault with a dangerous weapon, felony assault, and several gun-related charges. In the end, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 125 years. Number 3. Saul Murray. In early 2022, 33-year-old Saul Murray posted photos of himself wearing Rolex watches on Instagram. Just weeks later, a neighbor entered his apartment building after working the night shift and found him lying naked in a pool of blood. Someone had stabbed him in the leg, severing his femoral artery and causing him to fatally bleed out. 2 women, later identified as 35-year-old Sir Preet Dillon and 21-year-old Temadayo Orr, were seen leaving the building on surveillance footage. They were followed by 29-year-old Cleon Brown and 31-year-old Ikram Afia, who appeared to have a large knife in his hand. Investigators uncovered further evidence that the 4 suspects co-conspired to rob Murray over a several-week period leading up to the crime. According to prosecutors, Sir Preet Dillon reached out to Murray shortly after he posted the Rolex photos. The women were accused of using their sex appeal to gain entry into the victim's home, where they slipped GHB, a sedative, into his wine to knock him out. Swabs from both sides of the victim's face contained Sir Temadayo's DNA, indicating that they seduced him as part of their plan to make off with his valuables. All 4 suspects were convicted of conspiring to rob Murray. Afia was found guilty of murder and possession of the knife that was used to kill the victim and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. The other 3 suspects were convicted of manslaughter and received prison sentences ranging from 7 to 10 years. Number 2. Tracy Sh Hutsona. In 2015, Tracy Sh Hutsona applied for a job as the assistant manager of Jumana Kidd, the ex-wife of former NBA star Jason Kidd. She seemed like the perfect fit for the position, overqualified even. Tracy owned a seemingly successful luxury concierge firm that catered to the rich and famous. Jumana needed the help and was happy to give her the job. In addition to owning the concierge firm Elite Lux Life, Tracy ran a YouTube channel called Homeless Millionaires, where she and her husband Daryl showed off luxury cars, chartered jets, and lavish outings, things they claimed were perks of their concierge work. In one episode of her show, Tracy said, "We're living like millionaires, we're living like our billionaire clients, but we're working." However, the only thing she was working to do was steal her clients' identities and money. When Jumana's financial team cautioned her against overspending, she realized that more than $300,000 had disappeared from her accounts. She confronted Tracy, who tearfully admitted to opening a credit card in Jumana's name and promised to pay the money back. Jumana forgave her and they agreed to a payment plan, which Tracy kept up with faithfully. What Jumana didn't realize was that Tracy had figured out more clever and hidden ways to continue stealing her money. Tracy somehow accessed her employer's laptop, filtered Jumana's financial notifications into spam, and made herself the primary holder on several of Jumana's accounts. She siphoned more than $1 million, including cash from her boss's children's college savings funds, and caused Jumana's credit score to drop into the 400s. The second time Jumana realized Tracy was stealing from her, she cut all ties and went to law enforcement. Thanks to Tracy's penchant for showing off her lifestyle on social media, investigators didn't have to look hard to see where all the money had gone. She'd spent it on jewelry, phones, nightclubs, luxury hotels, restaurants, and other things she had no business buying with someone else's money. Tracy was finally arrested in 2021. She pleaded guilty to wire fraud in 2022 and was sentenced to 51 months in federal prison the following year, which means she'll see freedom again in a little over 4 years. It won't be her first prison stint, and it likely won't be her last either. Number 1. Taylor Goldblat. 24-year-old Taylor Goldblat was trying to brand himself as an influencer on YouTube back in 2014 and managed to gain a modest following of around 1,400 subscribers with his videos, which often involved showing off cash and designer items. Police believed that this made him the target of a robbery one morning in 2014. Goldblat was asleep in his apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side when a pair of intruders scaled the fire escape and entered through an open window. The suspects woke Goldblat up and threatened him at knife point while they looted his apartment for valuables, taking clothing, sneakers, designer bags, and other items. Luckily, the thieves didn't hurt Goldblat. They were seen exiting the building with large bags on surveillance footage that was captured after the robbery. Police estimated the total amount of goods stolen at $20,000, but Goldblat insisted the value was closer to $50,000. The security video was released to the public in hopes that someone might be able to help identify the suspects, but there have been no updates on the case since the story broke, indicating that the burglars likely got away with their crime. Would you rather get stuck paying for an expensive meal after your wealthy date slipped out of the restaurant to avoid the bill, or sit through a frustratingly awkward date with someone who's too busy posting photos of themselves on social media to pay much attention to the conversation? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.